My name is Orion. My story begins with the study of energy healing and martial arts. In 2003, I healed myself from a debilitating brain disorder, and I realized I could heal others too. You could say I had an epiphany about states of being. Years ago, I started my practice in Toronto. Now it is time to share with you. Welcome to my channel.
Well, hi, this is Orion, the Medical Intuitive. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be discussing what is a medical intuitive and how I can help you. Or maybe I can't help you, I don't know, we'll see. How does one become a medical intuitive? I'll start with that. You can train for it. Remote viewing is well known and psychic work. Absolutely, there are some psychics and people who are able to look into things, and this was my case. I'll give you my story. When I was a kid, it was kind of torturous. But my parents would put the presents underneath the tree, but the rule was you were not allowed to open the presents. You were never allowed to. You look at them from the distance. You're allowed to sit on the couch, but they put them in front of the Christmas tree, and I would just sit there. And in my mind, in my awareness, I would go pick up the present, shake it, feel the weight, look inside, and see what's there. Now, this seems like a very silly thing, and I'm sure every kid sort of did that in their mind. My brain worked a little differently. I felt like I could see inside. I could feel the material, the weight, the composition. Is it metal? Is it plastic? I was very good at saying, oh, that's the remote control car, and oh, that's the battery pack, and oh, that's the controller. And I just kind of knew things. I don't know how I knew them. I just was more often than not correct. And other times I'd say, well, it's plastic and metal in my mind. It's triangular. And I'd open up, oh, it's an alarm clock. There was a lot of things like that where I would kind of know what it was. And then, of course, open it up. And, as a kid, you want to act surprised. You're surprised. But more often than not, I wasn't that surprised. It just made sense to me because I felt like I already knew what it was. And I wouldn't know all the details. I would be able to say, well, that's a light plushy thing, like a soft cushiony thing. And maybe it's a stuffed animal. It turns out to be like slippers that are cushiony slippers. But it wasn't a surprise. I kind of knew things. That's how it started out for me, just remote viewing, being able to look into things. And in the courses I do when I teach medical intuitive readings, the first thing I get people to do after waking their pineal gland in their heart and some activations and connecting with the soul, I put 3 boxes up. And I say, okay, to the group, okay, what's in the first box? And I teach techniques in order to look inside the box. Well, it's actually interesting with about 2 to 3 hours worth of techniques. People can usually get inferences about what's in the box. They can usually know it's how heavy it is, what kind of material it is. I can't always tell you what it is. So I'll give an example. One group would say, oh, that thing, I see feathers. Another person says, I see yellow. Another person says, I see a toy. Another one says, I see water. And it turned out to be a rubber ducky. And they were all correct, but they didn't have context for what they were seeing or their inferences. So it starts off like that. It starts off with ideas, being able to infer aspects of something. And with practice, you can put together, say, well, it's yellow, it's small, and it's for water. And you can put 2 or 3 inferences together. You might not always see it's a duck, but as a medical intuitive, I know what the organs look like. I know what a liver looks like. I know what it feels like. I know what a stomach feels like, a pancreas, a spleen, kidney. I know what these things feel like. And I know they have personalities. In Chinese medicine, they talk about the different personalities of the organs. And true, it's absolutely true. If I'm working with someone who carries a lot of compartmentalized pain, let's say a lot of anger in the liver, when I do a reading, that liver will have rage and anger. It's compartmentalized emotion. And my job is to go in there and say, okay, I see this person, I see this event in your life, and let's do some work around the thing. Let's pull that emotion out and see it, work with it, let it go, go through the periods of anger to acceptance. And if they can do that thing, then the liver doesn't have a reason to be angry, and then the healing can begin. So the readings are about, feeling out what's what in the body. And it really comes from the chakras as a base point. I start with the root chakra, and then I go into the lower organs. If I'm working with a woman, let's say, we'll start off at the root chakra, and we'll talk about family dynamics, upbringing, maybe abuse, because that will show up. I'll see these black stripes through the root chakra, and the black stripes are usually abuse or inferred abuse from situations such as abandonment or things like that are not necessarily direct, but inferred from those experiences. Or maybe a parents fighting with a divorce, and that will show up as abuse, a black stripe in the root chakra. and we'll have a discussion about that thing. But that black stripe or that divorce or that situation that's unresolved will show up as dysfunction in the body. It's just compartmentalized. That's just how it works. So I start off with the root chakras, and I work my way up. And each chakra has a story. Yeah, the root chakra is about family dynamics, worth. Self-worth is really a common thing. If people have big families and they're very loving to their big families, the root chakra will generally be bright, shining. And if people feel very abandoned or feel neglected, that root chakra will be a little muted down, and the feeling will be unworthiness. That shows up a lot in root chakras. Second chakra might be about creative outlets or sexuality issues. The third chakra is usually about job worth, ego, and when there's a third chakra issue, people have trouble accepting praise from other people because they that's where their self worth in terms of like the performance is usually in the third chakra. Um, when you go up to the heart is usually obviously about your feelings and your worth, but it's also your emotional worth. Whereas the third chakra is usually about job. Almost always it shows up as job and job performance, job issues. Or if you don't have a job, it's your what you do in life shows up in that third chakra. We go up to the heart, and of course that's emotionality. But in the heart itself is actually layers. And so an issue, let's say at the bottom of the body in the root chakra, let's say problems in the bladder, at the very tip of the body, will show up in the bottom of the heart. It becomes like a hologram of the whole of the body. So the issues at the bottom of the heart will also relate to the bottom of the body. Top of the heart, top of the head. So when people have chronic headaches, I look at the top of the heart and see what's there. And maybe it's a dynamic with a past memory or a feeling that's held there in the top of their heart, or issue with that person they're holding issue with in the top of the heart will show up on the top of their head and they get headaches. So there's so many different versions of this. There's so many stories that come out of this work. And my job is to read it, help people process it out if possible. And that's a very personal choice to heal. I don't always tell people healing is the right way for them. Sometimes they want to just to look into it, have ideas about it, think about it for a couple of years before they want to heal. Other people just want to rip it out, like, oh, I have dad issues, I want to rip that out. And so healing is a very personal choice for people, but I don't insist they have to. I start off with a reading and we go from there. So that's a medical intuitive reading. How do I do it? Well, I mentioned earlier about looking in boxes, opening boxes and seeing what's there. The body's no different. In fact, the body is a little easier to read than an inanimate object because the body has a personality. You're reading something that's alive. So if I'm looking at a kidney and there's, let's say, pissed offness in the kidney, that's a real common one. Old, like someone who's been working a job and then they've been treated badly by the job might have kidney problems. That comes up very often. And if there's a male boss, it's generally going to be the right kidney, not the left one. If they have a female boss, it might be the left kidney, the female side. Some people say the right side is the male and the left side is the female side. I truly believe that. Other cultures say it's the reverse, but in my experience, the male side is the right side, the strong side, and the female side is the left side symbolically. So when we look on the right side of the body issues, that's what's the male issues in your life, whether it's your own masculinity or the males around you, and the female side is the left side. So if someone has chronic left side problems, I start asking about sisters, female bosses, mothers, things like that, because they'll show up on the left side of the body. And again, not completely, but this is generalities from doing hundreds upon hundreds of readings over the years. It's actually interesting. When I started doing this, my mother was a past life regressionist, and she would say, hey, that thing that Edgar Casey does with reading the body, I think you could do this. If I just put you in a relaxed state and I give you a name, let's see what you can do. And so this is the wonders of my mother. She's an amazing woman, but she was very out there and curious about stuff. And she knew I had these abilities. So she said, okay, so she would give me a list of names, a name, an address, an age, just the information about somebody, one of her friends usually. And I'd go into it. She'd evoke me down to a deep state, and I'd do this whole reading about the person, the physicality, their emotionality, all the things that are going on in their lives, or things earlier in their life that they were carrying on about. So she would then, as a gift, send them off to her friends. Well, she didn't ask permission. So we got a lot of angry, embarrassed, well, I didn't ask you to read me, and I don't really want that information out there, because apparently I was quite accurate with this stuff right from the get-go. And so we learned, in fact, whenever I do a session with people, I always ask permission, because I'll tell them what's going on. And I remember in my early days as a medical intuitive, but I was kind of cocky and in my 30s, and I wanted to prove myself. So I remember going to a party, and there was a lawyer who was very left brain organized type A kind of personality. You know what I'm talking about. And he says, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I'm a medical intuitive." And that was one of the first times I actually put that out there. I usually say I'm a personal trainer, a healer, a coach, a therapist. Everyone doesn't ask questions when you say you're a therapist. But I was a little cocky. I said, "Well, I'm a medical intuitive." And the guy, he's like, "Oh," he's like, "that sounds like horseshit." I just remember this. And I was, being the martial art guy, I remember like, "Oh, I got to defend myself here." I'm like, "Really? Horseshit?" I said, "Let's talk about that issue in your lower back. Let's talk about the issues with your dad." And I just literally launched this whole reading on his spine. And he goes, "Okay, enough. I'm going." And he turns around and leaves the room. And he stays away from me the rest of the day. And I remember like, "Oh, well, that was really interesting." Again, I asked permission, but put my back against the wall in my early life. I definitely, I put my flex out there. That was there were so many moments like that where I'll challenge somebody and they'll just say, "Well, look, here's their knee-jerk reaction." They don't mean to be rude sometimes, or sometimes they do, but I challenge their belief systems, and I get these wonderful interactions. Another one was another party, and the guy was he was kind of interested in what I'm talking about. He was a school teacher in Toronto. I won't say his name. I never give up personal information, but I don't even remember his name. It was a long time ago, more than 20 years ago. And he starts asking me about, well, I said, "Well, I'm a medical intuitive." He says, "Well," he says, "that doesn't exist. That's not real. That's make believe." I said, "Really?" I said, "Do you want me to tell you about how you tie your wife up and beat her with a stick?" And the face, his face went pure white, and his wife was there, and she heard it, and she goes pure white, and she goes, "Honey, I think it's time to go eat some dinner now." And it was like this thing when you catch someone exactly on the thing. And turns out he and his wife were into BDSM, and he kept that very private from his life as a school teacher, obviously for obvious reasons about that. But it was one of these moments where it was right there for me. It was like right there, and I said, I don't do that anymore. I don't challenge people. I don't want to do that. But there's some funny stories about me doing this and trying this on as saying who I am truly to people to see what their reaction is, and really some really funny moments. But anyways, I'm a medical intuitive. If you're interested in my work, go to my website, orionmott.com. I have a lot of videos on there. I've been on a bunch of podcasts this year, so some really interesting conversations about consciousness and healing. So check me out below. I'll put my link below, and hope to hear from you. If you're interested in doing a medical intuitive reading, hit me up, and we'll talk to you then. Take care.